Hello and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura and today I'm talking about The Dead Zone by Stephen King, published in 1979, and I'm comparing it with the movie directed by David Cronenberg, released in 1983. And this is the story of a man who is in a coma, and when he reawakens, he can tell someone's past or future just by touching them. And I'm going to get right into the details of the plot, which means we are getting right into spoilers. So the movie begins with us seeing Johnny, who is a high school teacher, and he is dating a fellow high school teacher named Sarah. And the two of them go to a fair and they're on a roller coaster having a fun time, when suddenly Johnny starts to get a headache, and so he drops Sarah off. And while he's dropping her off, it is raining very hard, and she's telling him he should just stay the night, and she's obviously coming on very strong, but he tells her that some things are worth waiting for, and so he doesn't want to be intimate with her that night. And they also, say I love you and how they're gonna marry each other one day. And so he leaves in his Volkswagen Bug, which was a nice touch because it is specifically mentioned that he drives a Volkswagen Bug in the book. And so I just liked that they just made the effort to include such a small detail in the movie as well, because it's just like a passing comment made in the book. But anyway, he's driving his Volkswagen Bug home when this semi-truck that has this tank of milk is coming towards him, and the driver falls asleep and he is disconnected from the huge tank of milk, and so this tank is going sideways across the road, and so Johnny ends up driving into it and then milk spills everywhere. And they say not to cry over spilled milk, but I think this is an exception. And so that is what lands him in the hospital and in a coma for years. Whereas in the book, we begin when Johnny is 6 years old and he is ice skating, and he hits the back of his head. And then after this, he starts to get hunches about things, where he just kind of gets a lucky hunch, but it's so mild and infrequent that he doesn't think much of it. And later on, as things happen through the course of the story, he actually doesn't even remember hitting his head when he skated. So we get that scene in the book, but Johnny himself, he doesn't even remember that happened. But in the book, we see once again that Johnny is a school teacher dating Sarah, another school teacher. And in the book, they go to the fair. However, in the book, they're about to leave the fair, and Sarah tells him that she wants to stay the night with him. And so they're both in a good mood, excited to get home, when suddenly he sees this gambling wheel, and he just has that lucky feeling. And so he's like, oh, let me just put some money on this for a second. And he ends up gambling on this wheel. And like I said, due to his lucky hunch, he ends up winning a considerable amount of money. However, during the course of his winning, Sarah gets food poisoning and she begins to throw up. And so after he gets his winnings, he drives Sarah home. And I love this scene in the book because even though he's winning, it's going well, there is just so much tension and just an ominous undertone to it all. And then Sarah starts to get sick. And so yeah, I just thought it was really well written. And then yeah, he drops Sarah off at home and she is still very sick. And so he asks oh, do you want me to stay and look after you? Because clearly they're not going to have sex at this point with her being so sick. But it is also early enough in the relationship that she doesn't want him around when she is throwing up and having diarrhea. So she's no, don't stay here. Sorry, can you call a taxi and just go home? Because you don't need to stay, I'll be fine. But at this point, they do tell each other, I love you. They don't talk about marriage, but yeah, they say, I love you, which is of course a huge deal. And then from there, he gets a taxi home, and then the taxi, there's these two teenagers drag racing, and one of the cars comes straight for the taxi. And this is what causes Johnny to be in a coma. And yeah, I thought the book was better having Sarah get food poisoning. That made way more sense. In the movie, it's kind of why isn't he staying the night? It seemed like he didn't have enough of a reason, just being kind of oh, some things are worth waiting for. It just seemed kind of silly, I guess, that Sarah is coming on so strong and he's just no, we shouldn't. And then the fact that it was milk, this semi-truck full of milk, also, I don't know if it was meant to be funny, but it seemed kind of funny. So yeah, and then we didn't get the wheel scene, which I thought was, like I said, just so suspenseful in the book. Yeah, so just in general, all of this beginning stuff I thought was better done in the book. And then, yeah, he wakes up from his coma, which in the book, while he is in the coma, we are hearing about what is happening with Sarah and his parents. Like, not a ton, but we are, definitely aware of what's going on. Whereas in the movie, we just flash forward to him waking up and realizing that he has been in a coma for 5 years. And in the book, his mom was very religious to begin with, which I do like that Stephen King, because like it's such a cliche to be like, oh, this, fanatically Christian religious person who's like so crazy and whatever. I like that he humanizes her a bit more and he gets into why she turned to religion in the first place. And it was because of these health issues like cancer or something that she had after having Johnny. And so that's kind of what turned her more towards God. And then after Johnny is in his coma, that is such a traumatic experience for her to have her only child be in a coma that she then just goes even further into these just really extreme ideas and beliefs. And, these days we hear about people being part of different forums, but she begins to subscribe to these different like pamphlets and magazines and like writing letters back and forth with these other members sharing their crazy ideas. And she just really goes off the rails. And in the movie, we do see that when Johnny wakes up, his mom is there being like, oh, she's saying religious stuff about how like, God has a duty for you and blah, blah, blah. But we don't see the full extent of just like how unhinged she had become and the stress it was putting on her husband. But yeah, in both she tells him that, she knew he would wake up, she had faith, she knew that God had a duty for him and that he needs to fulfill his godly purpose now, essentially. But yeah, during the time when he was in his coma, Sarah ends up getting married, and by the time he awakes, she already has a son who is like 7 months old or something. And in both, she does visit him at the, the hospital or wherever he is recuperating. And in the book, he touches her and he gets a flash of, it was like 2 or 3 years ago now, he sees that she had lost her wedding ring and she thought it was lost in the hotel room, but he's like, no, it's actually in your luggage and this is the pocket it's in. And so she goes back home after this and she finds the ring and she's like, wow, like that was so weird. And this is not in the movie. She goes to see him, but he doesn't have any it's not a premonition because it was something from the past, but he doesn't have any impressions about her when he sees her in the movie. But yeah, so he can touch people and know things about them. In both book and movie, he touches a woman at the hospital and he knows that her house is on fire as they speak. And luckily, her house and her child in the movie is saved because of this. And then also his doctor, Sam Wyzak, he touches him. Actually, in the movie, he touches a photo of this guy's mom. In the movie, he touches the guy himself. But he sees that this guy thinks that his mom is dead, but he tells him, like, no, your mom is still alive. She lives in California. This is the city. Like, call her up. You'll find her. This is her last name now. And so the doctor calls her up, and he's like, oh my gosh, like, Johnny is the real thing. And then also, people start spreading word about this, especially with the lady, with him catching her house on fire. Other people were around when that happened. And so people start talking about this. And so they hold a press conference. And during this press conference, in the book, a reporter gives him a medallion to hold and see what he learns from this. Whereas in the movie, a reporter wants him to touch him and be like, oh, like if you're real, then like touch me. Like, what do you find out? And of course, Johnny is the real thing. And so, in both, he says something about the reporter's sister, essentially. But basically, he becomes like kind of famous / infamous for this power, even though he is not trying to be in the limelight, but different things keep happening that get him in the news. And yeah, like I said, in the book, he can touch objects and get impressions as well as people. But in the movie, they just focus on his ability to touch people and know things. And yeah, when he is doing that press conference in both book and movie, his parents are watching it on TV and his mom ends up having a stroke and dying. And then afterwards, when he is ready to leave the hospital, he goes back home and he lives with his dad. And to talk about the title, so in the book, early on when he is having brain tests done after the coma, the doctor is asking him to visualize different things, and he's realizing there are certain things, like he knows what they are, but he can't visualize it. For example, a park bench, he just can't see it in his mind. And so he calls it the dead zone, like, oh, like I know what it is, but I can't see it, it's in the dead zone. And he also has this with his visions where he will be able to tell someone like, oh, you're going to be in a building that will catch fire. But he's like, I can't tell what the building is though. Like the details on the building itself are in the dead zone. I just know you will be in some building and it's going to catch fire. And so this phrase comes up a number of times in the book where he'll mention that like something is in the dead zone and he can't access it. In the movie, it is briefly mentioned, but it's not like as clearly explained to us as it was in the book. And then, yeah, while he is staying with his dad in the book, Sarah writes him a letter being like, hey, like, I'm going to be in town at my friend's house. Here's her number. Give me a call if you want me to come over. And so he gives her a call and they plan for her to come over. And very soon after she comes over, she tells him how she wants to have sex with him, basically, in order to make up for what was lost between them. Like, because they should have had a relationship. Like, they should be together right now. But because she got sick with the hot dog, because of the taxi, because of the drag racers, they lost out, you know? And so she's like, to make up for what was lost, I want us to be together today. And then that'll be it. Because she still loves her husband, right? And so she's like, I can't, you know, just leave my husband. I want to be with him. I love him. I have a child with him. But I just want to be with you this one time. And so, yeah, so they are intimate. And then she has dinner that night with his father. And then her son is there as well. And so it's just this family moment of them enjoying this meal. And Johnny is thinking how, like, this is a glimpse into what their life would have been had he not been in a coma, right? He was like, my dad, this is the closest he'll ever get to playing with his grandson, you know, because this is how it should have been. But because of life, it isn't what ended up happening. And we get this in the movie as well. But Sarah doesn't write him and they don't phone. She just randomly shows up one day. And again, she tells him, you know, because in the movie, he had told her some things are worth waiting for. And so when she shows up, she's like, I've waited long enough. And so then they have sex that one time. She stays for dinner. And then she drives away and, you know, she tells him that this was a one-time thing. And in the book and movie, I really did like the scene when they're having dinner with the father. And the father also has, you know, he has a high chair and these toys that he had made for Johnny because he's a carpenter and he had held on to them. And so now her son is able to use these toys. And again, I just thought it was a really beautiful moment and a look into, again, what should have been, right? If not for the accident. So it was just a very bittersweet moment. And then later in the story, Johnny is reached out to by the Castle Rock sheriff because there is a serial killer who he started killing women when Johnny was in his coma and they still have not caught him. And in the movie, the sheriff just shows up to Johnny's house because, again, Johnny is infamous/famous. And so the sheriff is like, I'm at my wit's end. Like, will you please come to Castle Rock and see if you can help us catch this guy? Whereas in the book, his doctor, the one he had told that his mom was still alive, that doctor is friends with the sheriff. And so as the sheriff is talking about how they still can't catch this killer, this doctor gives the sheriff Johnny's number and he tells the sheriff, like, this guy is for real. Like, give him a call and he can help. And at first, Johnny is very reluctant, but eventually he decides to go help. And in both, the killer ends up being one of the police officers. And in the book, the sheriff, when Johnny tells him this, it's just the two of them. And the sheriff refuses to believe this because he's like, what? Like, that guy is like my son. Like, he's been over to my house. He's played with my children. Like, I've been like his mentor, basically. Like, there's no way it's him. You're crazy. But eventually, after hours of discussing it and going over evidence late into the night, the sheriff is finally, you know, enough evidence has been presented that he's like, okay, like, let's go over to his house and see. And this guy lives with his mom. And when they show up, the mom doesn't want to let them in. And Johnny, I think he touches her. He's like, you knew your son was the killer all this time and you helped cover up for him. And so that's why she doesn't want them coming in, right? But they come inside the house and they find him dead. He had killed himself because he had seen Johnny and he just knew that he was caught. And so he had killed himself and he is wearing a sign that he had written, which says, I confess. And in the movie, so Johnny is at the crime scene when he gets the guy's name. And so he says, like, oh, like, Frank Dodd is the name. He's like, Frank Dodd, like, that's who did it. And Frank Dodd is there, right? And so as soon as he hears this, he takes off. And so the sheriff is like, oh, like, where's Frank Dodd? And they're like, he left. And so they go to his house. And again, the mom is there, not wanting to let them in. And they go and they find Frank has killed himself. And again, Johnny feels that the mom had known all along. But then in this version, after they find his dead body, the mom then comes out with her own gun. And ultimately, she ends up being shot and killed because she is trying to shoot them. And the mom in the movie is played by Colleen Dewhurst. And she plays Marilla in the 1980s Anne of Green Gables. And Marilla is just such an incredible character, right? Like, she can have like a rough exterior at times, but obviously she just has a heart of gold and is such a great mom to Anne. And so to see her in this role where she plays like a crazy lady, it was pretty interesting to see her in just such a different role. But I've covered Anne of Green Gables, very different than Stephen King, but that book is fantastic. So as is the TV show. So yeah, I will link to that if you want to check that out. But one last thing about Frank Dodd's mom. So in both, she knew he was the killer. But in the book, we also find out that she was just really twisted and abusive towards Frank. And we just heard more details as to the disturbing things with Frank and the way his mom messed him up, kind of. But after this, Johnny, he's like, man, like, I don't want to be a psychic. I want to be a teacher. Like, that's what I love. That's what I'm passionate about. And fun fact, Stephen King was an English teacher before his writing career took off. But anyway, so he begins being a tutor for the son of this rich guy named Roger. And in the book, the son is 17, whereas in the movie, the son is like 12. But in both, he really connects with the son, and the son makes a ton of progress while he is being tutored by Johnny. And then the details are different, but later on in the story, this son hugs Johnny, and Johnny, he sees the future and sees that the son is going to die. And in the movie, he sees that the son will be playing hockey and the ice will break, and he and the fellow hockey players are going to fall into the lake. And so he tells the father this, but the father just gets super upset, and he fires Johnny on the spot. And he says, like, I'll cancel the game, but, you're fired, you're out of here. But then once Johnny is gone, the dad is like, okay, let's go play hockey. And the son is like, you said you were going to cancel the game. And he's like, I just told that to get him out of here, but of course we're still going to play, come on. But the son doesn't want to play because he, when Johnny touches people, they also get like this weird feeling. And so the son like felt a weird feeling when Johnny touched him. And so he's like, no, like, I'm not playing hockey. But the dad still has the team play without the son, and then the ice does break, and then multiple kids end up dying. And then we see that the dad ends up being in like this just out of it depressed state due to the fact that he is responsible for the death of some of these kids, and Johnny never hears from them again. Whereas in the book, it is at a graduation party for this guy's son and his other, fellow students, and he sees that evening, the restaurant they are going to be having a party at is going to be struck by lightning and burned down, and multiple kids will die. And in this version as well, the father doesn't believe Johnny, but he has enough respect for Johnny that he's like, okay, we'll hold a party at my house. And so we'll invite all of the students and they can come here if they want. And so a lot of the students do end up just coming over to this guy's house, but some of them still do go to the restaurant. And so while Johnny is there with them, while these kids are celebrating graduation, they have the radio on. And at one point in the night, they hear the news bulletin that a restaurant has been struck by lightning and has caught fire, and multiple students are dead or in the hospital. And so again, when he had this premonition, there were a lot of people around. And then when they heard the news that it really did happen, he was at this party with these other kids. And so a lot of people are around being like, whoa, like he was right. And some people are grateful to him for saving them or saving their children. But then other people are freaked out by it, being like, what the heck? Like, they're just very uncomfortable. And so again, this thrusts Johnny into the limelight. And so even though here, the father and the son, they are still on good terms with Johnny, and they still try to write him letters and send him money and want to stay in contact with him. The father also pays off Johnny's medical bills. But regardless, Johnny runs away to live in Arizona because he just wants to get away from the fame he has acquired for being a psychic. But yeah, so in the book, he stays on good terms with the father and the son, whereas in the movie, once he's fired, he never hears from them again. And the restaurant that is struck by lightning, we got a scene early on in the book where a lightning rod salesman comes to this guy's establishment and tries to sell him a lightning rod. And I get that this comes into play later with this graduation party, but that scene was so random and unnecessary. Throughout the book, while we're hearing what is going on with Johnny, we also go back and forth between him and this guy named Greg Stillson. And so we're kind of tracking both of them at different stages in their life, which was really cool because we know, of course, their paths will cross in some way, and we're just waiting for that to happen. But in the movie, we don't hear about Greg Stillson till like halfway, maybe further than halfway. And by the time we hear him, he is running for like some local political office. But in the book, the first scene we get from him is when like he is 22 or something and he's a salesman, and he shows up to this house that has a dog, and the dog is barking at him. And at first he's nice to the dog, but then when he knocks and he sees that there is no one around, he then sprays the dog with something, I forget what, and it kind of blinds the dog. And then he like brutally kills the dog. And Stephen King talks about this scene in his book On Writing and like the purpose of this scene, because he was saying the point of it is that right then, our first time seeing Greg Stillson, we see that he is someone who cares about appearances and he wants to come off as like a nice, friendly guy, but how when no one is around, his true cruel colors show through. And, you know, because at first he's nice to the dog because he thinks people might be home. But as soon as he sees it's all clear, he brutally kills the dog. And yeah, I did think that was a great way to show, not tell, the kind of person he is. But yeah, later in the story, when Stillson is, 20 plus years older, he is now running for office and is holding a rally. So he decides to go and see Greg Stillson. And he has also been hearing a lot about this guy in the news, and he's kind of like wild and different. And a lot of people are going crazy for him because, again, he is just so unconventional. And so yeah, Johnny is very curious. And so he goes and he shakes his hand. And when he shakes Stillson's hand, he sees that Stillson will become the US president and that he will do something that will lead to a nuclear war. And he can't get all of the details because a lot of it is in the dead zone, but also like the feeling he gets is stronger than anything he has ever felt from anyone before. But he knows, based on his vision, that Stillson is going to be considerably older by the time this happens, when he wins the presidential election. And so he uses that as an excuse, being like, okay, I have a lot of time to think about this. I don't need to act rashly. Like, he doesn't want to have to kill him because that's killing a human is a huge deal. So he's like, I don't want to have to do that. So he spends a lot of time trying to figure out what his options are. And he just spends a lot of time researching Stillson. Whereas in the movie, Sarah is part of Stillson's like political committee. And in the book, her husband is in politics. But yeah, in the movie, they are part of Stillson's committee. And so she is there helping set up the rally. And the rally is like right across from Johnny's house. And so he sees her there. And so he goes out to the rally to try to see Sarah when he kind of gets pushed forward in the crowd. And he like unintentionally ends up shaking Stillson's hand. And in the movie, he sees clearly, like I said in the book, the vision was kind of spotty. But in the movie, he clearly sees that Stillson will start a nuclear war. And so yeah, Johnny, like I said, after the thing with the guy's son at the graduation party, he then goes to Arizona. And so he is just in Arizona biding his time, trying to figure things out. When while he is there, he finds out that he has a tumor that has been growing bigger and bigger in his brain, and he has a limited amount of time left alive. So he realizes like, wow, I don't have all the time I thought I did because I'm going to be dead by the time Stillson is president, so I need to act now. So he goes back to the East Coast. Stillson is speaking in some city hall area, and so he's hiding in the balcony waiting for the meeting to begin so that he can assassinate Stillson. And so once Stillson shows up, like right away, Johnny stands up with his rifle and he shoots at Stillson multiple times. However, he keeps missing, which was kind of funny, I thought, right? Like, it's this dramatic moment, and then he keeps missing the target. But obviously, this is a very serious situation, and it's chaos down below. And Stillson, there's a lady who has a child, and he grabs the child and uses it as a body shield. And there's a photographer there who gets pictures of Stillson doing this. Meanwhile, Stillson's own men are firing at Johnny, and so Johnny ends up falling. And as he is dying, Stillson ends up coming over, and he's able to grab Stillson's ankle. And when he touches him, he sees that even though he didn't kill Stillson, this event has changed the trajectory of the future, and that Stillson will no longer be president. Whereas in the movie, so Sarah, again, she's part of Stillson's committee. And when Johnny stands up, which we don't get the tumor story, like Johnny just chooses to take action right away. And by the way, this book, so Johnny goes into his coma in 1970. He wakes up in 1975. And then the event with Stillson happens in like 1979. So the book spans a number of years, even after he wakes up from his coma. Whereas in the movie, it seems like once he wakes up from his coma, all of these events are happening within like 1 year. It's all very quick. But anyway, he doesn't waste any time. He's like, I'm going to kill this guy. And so he stands up with his rifle, and Sarah is there with her child. And it is Sarah's son that Stillson grabs to shield himself. And again, Johnny is missing, and Stillson's men are shooting Johnny. Johnny ends up falling. And in this version, when he grabs Stillson's ankle, he sees not only that Stillson won't be president, but he sees that this image of Stillson holding the child up is like the cover of Newsweek, and it says how Stillson's career is over. And then he sees Stillson commit suicide, which was pretty dark. And Johnny, after he sees this, he's like smiling and like happy, being like, yes, like I changed the future. But the fact that he's happy at seeing Stillson commit suicide, I was kind of surprised because that's like such a should you be happy about anyone committing suicide, right? Like, I know Hitler committed suicide, and they do in both book and movie, they compare Stillson to a future Hitler. But yeah, it was almost like darkly funny, the fact that he was so happy to see Stillson commit suicide. Like, that's such a serious thing. And yeah, I like, it seemed humorous, and yet at the same time, I was just like, should he be that happy about that? But anyway, but then also in the movie, there is a photographer who takes pictures of Stillson with the baby, and Stillson, he tells his goon, being like, that guy had a camera, go catch him. But then his goon is like, I didn't see any photographer, because at this point he has lost respect for Stillson and he wants people to see the true Stillson. And this was such a lame line in the movie. Like, this guy, we've been seeing Stillson, I haven't mentioned this, but he has been like manipulating and forcing his way into the top of the political rankings. And they have been threatening people and killing people, and he's just like a bad guy. And this goon of his has been along for the ride. And now suddenly this guy suddenly has a conscience and is like, I'm not going to catch him. It just seems silly to me. But anyway, as Johnny lies dying, Sarah in the movie comes running over and she hugs him as Johnny dies, and that is the end. And when it comes to book versus movie, so this book was actually Stephen King's first bestseller. It came out 5 years after Carrie. It makes sense to me that this one did so well because it isn't like a straight up horror novel. There really are no horror aspects to this story. And so I think it definitely had wider appeal because of that. And speaking of Carrie, he does reference Carrie in this book. I've read books where he references a character as if all of these characters are in the same universe, you know? But in this book, he references the book Carrie. Like, that is a real book in this world of the Dead Zone. And so it was just a funny reference there. But yeah, this one, it reminded me kind of 11/22/63. Both of them deal with politics and both of them deal with people trying to change the future. But then also like the romance in both of them was similar in some ways too. But also it's not like a book with both books, like they don't have a suspenseful plot per se. Like there is an overarching plot going on, but for the majority of the book, we're not even focusing on that. We're just with our main character who, yes, is in a unique situation, but we're just with them as they are living their daily lives. And there's so many side plots we see them experience. And yeah, I think Stephen King writes books like that really well. And so if you like 11/22/63, you should definitely check out The Dead Zone. And if you want to read a Stephen King book, but you're not a fan of like horror books and you don't want to be scared, then The Dead Zone would be a great option. The title is kind of misleading. It makes it seem like it would be creepy, but it's really not. And yeah, in case you can't tell, I did really love this book, and I did love the ending too, how we see that he does change the future, even though he didn't end up having to kill Stillson in order to do that. And then yeah, with him dying in the end, and then the relationship with Sarah, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. And the movie did keep a lot from the book, and they definitely try to include as much as possible. And while I respect that, I think if they wanted to include all of these side plots, that they either one, should have made the movie longer, or they should have gotten rid of either the Castle Rock killer story or gotten rid of the tutoring story, because trying to include both of those with the Greg Stillson story, that was too much going on for an hour 45-minute movie. So yeah, they should have had like one other thing and then Greg Stillson. And I did see that this was turned into a TV show in the 2000s, and that makes more sense to me, right? Because this book does come across like almost episodic, right? Where we see him, help catch the killer, and then we see him off on this other adventure, and then he goes on this adventure. And so it makes sense to turn this into a TV show. And then yeah, I also loved in the book how we got to see more of Greg Stillson throughout the story, whereas in the movie we don't see him until partway through. And I get that in the movie, I get their reasoning. And again, it would have been too much if they tried to include Stillson's background. So I don't think they should have tried to include that. It would have been too much, but I did like in the book that we got to see those moments. But also something about the movie that was kind of distracting is Christopher Walken, he plays Johnny, and there are multiple scenes where the way his collar is popped, it's like he's trying to look like Dracula. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it was kind of distracting. I don't know if that was like the fashion in 1983. You can let me know down in the comments. But nonetheless, I did think the acting was really good. And yeah, which I said, if you want to read a Stephen King but don't like horror, this is a good option. If you want to watch a David Cronenberg movie, but you have a weak stomach, this is also a great option because David Cronenberg, I associate him with movies that are disturbing, but this one, relatively speaking, it's not that bad. But nonetheless, when all is said and done, I am going to say the book wins. I did prefer that one. The movie, just the pacing, they don't give any of these stories enough time to breathe because we're constantly just moving on to the next thing. And so it does go by quickly, but I just think we should have spent more time with certain events. And so, as I said, they should have just not tried to include as much as they did ultimately. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts down below if you have read this book, if you have seen this movie. It's been a while since I've covered Stephen King, so it was fun returning to him. And if you want to watch some of my past Stephen King episodes, I will link to Dr. Sleep, which is one I did in like 2022. And I love that book and movie so much. So I highly recommend it. I will link to that on the screen if you are interested. Let me know what Stephen King book versus movie you would like to see me do in the future. I have done quite a few of them at this point, but let me know down in the comments what you would like to see me cover. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.